Hey guys, this is Miss Hannah. Today we're going to be talking about interpreting graphic features. That's our topic this week and for next week is we're learning how to look at the graphic features in a text. And by graphic features, I mean this type of thing, timelines like this, illustrations, pictures, and diagrams, things like that are added to informational text to give us more information. We're going to be interpreting them. Interpreting means to find meaning in something. So think about an interpreter, like if someone speaks Spanish and needs it translated to English, they'll use an interpreter. And the interpreter will change the language of Spanish to English or English to Spanish so that they can communicate. So think, when you're interpreting this, you're trying to figure out what it's communicating to you. What information is it communicating to you? Okay, so moving on from that, I'm just going to model how I would answer all the questions on this quiz so that you can answer the questions on your quiz today. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to write your first and last name, type it out, capital letters at the beginning. Who's your homeroom teacher? Just click the one that applies. Okay, now here's your passage. Today I've put the passage inside the quiz so you don't have to flip back and forth, and I hope that works for everybody. So my passage looks like it's about kites. So this first used in China is probably talking about kites. I'm going to start by reading the questions. I like to start by reading the questions on assessments because that tells me what I should be looking for when I'm reading, and maybe that will make those things stand out to me more as I read. And you can do this on your quizzes too and on your tests. It helps out a lot so that you know what you're looking for and you have a purpose for reading. So I'm going to start off with this first question. It says, based on the first sentence of the passage and the graphic feature, this passage is mostly about, I know it has something to do with kites, but all of those have something to do with kites. All the answer choices, I see kite, kites, kites, kites. So I'm going to need to be figuring out what it's mostly about when it comes to kites. Okay. My next question says, one piece of information you can gather from the passage and the graphic feature is, so I'm looking for information I can get from the passage and the graphic feature. So I'm looking for something I could find in the passage and the graphic feature. Okay, so I'll be looking for that as I read. What information could be added to the graphic feature in place of the question mark to complete it? So if I look up here, there's a question mark. So I'm going to be needing to figure out what could go there to complete this graphic feature, this timeline. I know that this graphic feature is a timeline. And then my free response at the bottom says, according to the graphic feature, where were kites first made and used? And how do you know? So I know to answer this question, it says, according to the graphic feature. So I'll be looking at the graphic feature. And I'm looking for where, so a location, where were kites first made and used? And how do I know? So there's two parts to that question. I'm going to have to make sure I answer both. So just going up here, I'm going to read my passage. Kites have been around for more than 2,000 years. People believe that the first kite came from China. A farmer tied his hat to a string to keep it from being blown away in the wind. That is believed to be the very first kite. A European explorer named Marco Polo first wrote about making and flying kites. That was in 1295. Kites became more popular. In the 16th century, kites were sold as children's toys. Then scientists began using kites in the 18th century. So first they were used by kids and then they were used by scientists. One example is Alexander Wilson used a kite to measure air temperature in 1749. He attached a thermometer to a kite and recorded air temperatures at 3,000 feet. In 1752, Ben Franklin proved that lightning was electricity. He used kites to prove it. Kites have been useful in many ways. Okay, then I'm looking at my graphic feature. I see a timeline starting in the 5th century. The kites were first used in China. 1295, Marco Polo documented kites. 16th century, they were used as children's toys. 18th century, they were used in science. 1749, I'm going to look back up in the passage, and I see right here that it says Alexander Wilson used a kite to measure air temperature in 1749. So I know there's a question about that already, so I'm going to go down here and see if I can answer it. Okay, so this one says, in place of the question mark, what information can be added to the graphic feature in place of the question mark to complete it? And I know that said Alexander Wilson used kites to measure air temperature. So that one's out of the way. And then Ben Franklin used kites to study lightning. That's there. That's in 1752. Okay, based on the first sentence of the passage and the graphic feature. So the first sentence of the passage says, kites have been around for more than 2,000 years, and I'm looking at the graphic feature. The timeline right here says they were first used in China. Marco Polo documented kites. So the passage is mostly about, is it about who made the first kite? No, it doesn't even tell me. How the use of kites has changed over the years? I think that might be it. I'm going to select it, but I might change it. How kites are used for medicine? I didn't see anything about medicine. How kites are just for children. And I saw that they were for scientists later on too, so I know that's not it. So I'm going to go with B. One piece of information you can gather from the passage and the graphic feature is, so I'm looking for something that's in the passage and the graphic feature. The first one says, in 1749, Alexander Wilson used a kite to measure air temperature. I know that I said that we could add that because it wasn't in the graphic feature, so that doesn't apply because that's not part of the graphic feature from the beginning. Okay, Wilson's kite measured air temperature at 3,000 feet high, and I already know that Wilson's kite wasn't even included in the graphic feature, so that one's also out. This one says, in the 16th century, kites were sold as children's toys. Do I see that in the passage? 16th century, kites were sold as children's toys. Yes, it's in the passage. Is it in the graphic feature? 16th century, used as children's toys. It is in both, so that is my answer. And then I see the last one says none of the above, and that doesn't apply because C is the answer. All right, now moving on to my free response. According to the graphic feature, where were kites first made and used? How do you know? Okay, so I'm looking at the graphic feature. And I see that in the 5th century, they were first used in China. So I'm going to start off, since it starts according to the graphic feature, I'm going to start mine off that way too. According to the graphic feature, where were kites first made and used? Kites were first made and used in China. So I gave my location because it asked where. So I know I was supposed to give a location, and I gave China. Okay, now it says, how do you know? And I know when there are two parts to a question, I have to make sure to answer both for full credit. So I'm going to say, I know this because I looked at the timeline and I saw the first, what could I call that? The first dot told me that kites were first used in China. And that would do it. So I hope this has been a good explanation. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the free response box at the bottom after you do your response. I think this is going to be a pretty easy one for everybody, but I want you to do your best to make sure you read your entire passage and really try to interpret or gather meaning from your graphic feature. All right, you guys have a great day.